Welcome to the Funky Marketing Podcast. I'm glad to have you here for the beginning of the new season, and I'm glad to talk here with somebody that I've met just recently, I think a month or two ago. And I found out that he's a great guy. He does a lot of great things, and I think what we will share today will be something that will be extremely useful for you. So join me in welcoming Eric to the podcast.
Hey everybody, thanks for having me here, Nemanja.
Thanks for joining me. It's kind of interesting how things go, and we always talk about partnerships and how you know getting to know people helps. And it was interesting. You approached me, and you were recommended by Andrei Zinkiewicz, a friend of both of us. And usually that's how things go. And recently, I think yesterday or the day before, somebody asked me also about about the community, about those kind of things, about the podcast, and I mentioned your community. So it's interesting how things go, and we always say, like, in B2B now you need to be calculated, rational, and all those things, but then it comes to always, who are the people we know and trust.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, your reputation is everything. I've been pretty fortunate. The past 3.5 years, I've been able to build my reputation on LinkedIn, but not just that, connect with and either collaborate with lots of people in the B2B space that are pretty well known. So I'm actually surprised that we didn't get to know each other sooner, because I've known
See.
Andre for a couple of years at least, and a lot of other people that we mutually know. So it took us a while, but it happened. We finally made it happen, Nemanja. We're here.
Yeah, that definitely, and we are going out with a boom, as they say.
Yeah, definitely.
Perfect. So let's make an introduction. Tell us what exactly are you doing, and I think it's going to be useful for the people because not many of them actually do that. And I think a lot of people listening would find what you're doing really useful for them and for their businesses.
Yeah, I like to say I help B2B brands, specifically SaaS brands, build trust at scale through B2P, through B2B podcasters. And so, how do we do that? Uh, Basically, podcasting is not really considered a growth channel, but yet more and more people are tuning in to listen to podcasts. It's not just Americans tuning in, but Europeans, Australians, people all over the world. And they tune in because it's an easy way to learn something while they're doing a habit. Maybe they're ironing their clothes. Maybe they're out for a jog. Maybe they're at the gym. But it's becoming a habit for many of us, either listening to audio or going to YouTube and listening to different podcasts. And so in the B2B space, I would say there's probably maybe 100 or so B2B podcasts out there. Unfortunately, if those podcasts want to monetize their podcasts, they really can't work with the large networks like Spotify or some of the other big networks, because those networks just want podcasts that have 10,000 downloads or more a month. And so this is where I come in. I'm the bridge between SaaS brands and B2B podcasters. And I basically take care of the entire campaign management. I take care of creating the pitch, closing the deal, doing the entire campaign management, including performance and monitoring and tracking and optimization. And I just started that a little bit less than a year ago, but we have more than 30 podcasters in the community, including yourself now. And I operate not just in Europe, but also across the pond in North America. So pretty excited about it. We've been able to help a few different brands like Dealfront, Landbot, Sessions, and a lot more brands are coming to us because they're very interested. Influencer marketing's been on the rise, but it's mostly been seen as do a LinkedIn post or do something on Instagram or do something on TikTok. And a lot of people forget that there's a lot of B&B podcasters out there that are very credible, they're professional, and they have an audience. And so that's where B2B PodPros, my company, comes in.
Exactly. And, I've been just thinking about that. I wrote a newsletter a couple of weeks ago, and I think Maya Voye, who is also our friend and part of the community, wrote a great newsletter on Substack about the influencer marketing. What can you do to leverage all those things? And what you said resonated. As I'm seeing, people reach out to me not only for the podcast, but for me as an influencer. And I would like to say not an influencer, but subject matter expert in the field, because it's more trustful, and that's actually how I look at myself. And usually they come. We want a couple of posts, we want something, and I need to respond from the other side and say, let's do it differently. I've been doing a couple of strategies that worked, so let's try some of those instead of just going one post, because LinkedIn is something which is not very reliable, especially with the algorithm, with all those things. you know I even ended up in an empty feed for 2 weeks, I think a year and a half ago. So
Uh-huh.
nobody saw my post, and LinkedIn confirmed that, and they were like, keep steady, we are working on fixing that. And I'm like, what the fuck is happening? So I don't think many companies realize the nuances of the algorithm and how things work. And the LinkedIn is a very slow platform, then it takes time. On the other hand, you did something nicely, talk about one of the companies that you are working with. They realize it's a great post, they're getting engagement, so you got further engagement from that. So that's also a good example.
Yeah, that's one of the new things that we're going to start doing is allowing some brands to leverage the user-generated content that we create on their behalf if they want to. So if one of our podcasters, in addition to doing host rate ads on their podcast, also decides that they like the product, they use the product, they think it's going to be beneficial for their audience, and they decide to create a LinkedIn organic post and either write about it or do a video about it, and the brand says, hey, we really like that post, let's leverage it and maximize it, and let's put some paid media dollars behind it. That's something that we're starting to allow brands to do. Obviously, the creators get compensated for it, but I think it's a great way to just really experiment and find the kind of content that your target audience likes, and just have creators that are subject matter experts in their field and talk about your brand in such an authentic and genuine way.
Yeah, and especially now that we have like thought leadership ads, that I look at them not from a standpoint of on an influencer or somebody else, but from the standpoint of the company. They can make sure that their investment really brings back, the goals they are going after.
Yeah. Yeah. Dealfriend just did that on one of my posts. I think I wrote this post at least 3 weeks ago, and they saw that it performed really well just in my feed and my audience. And so recently, I think it's only been about 4 or 5 days, but it's already gotten maybe 15,000 additional impressions. And it's probably reaching a large of the target audience that they're trying to reach. And I give a really good visual of a couple of different tools or methods that I use for podcast tracking, and Dealfriend happens to be one of them. It's great. I mean, it's coming not from a promotional standpoint, but from me telling my audience, this is one of the ways that we track podcast campaigns.
Exactly. Oh, we have Irit Levy here. She was one of the guests in the podcast. So good to have previous guests coming back and listen to this and joining us. But tell me one thing. So we're going to talk about advertising on the podcast, building a community and all those things. But tell me, what does the podcast host need to do to get to the point when they can actually bring on the sponsorships and brands to kind of advertise on their podcast?
That's a great question. A lot of podcasters in my community didn't create a podcast with the intention of monetizing it. They just didn't, because they're company owners, agency owners like yourself, tech founders. They just don't have the time or bandwidth. The podcast is mostly about them building themselves as a subject matter expert. And so brands sometimes reach out to them, and they just don't have the capacity to deal with different sponsors and go back and forth and try to negotiate a deal. And this is where I come from. I come in. I save them a lot of time by doing all that back and forth work for them, by only bringing them sponsors that have a good product audience fit. Make sure that we're bringing long-term deals, and it's not just a one-time sponsorship for like 1 week. They don't have the time to do that, right? And so that's where my service comes in. But to answer your question, what do they need to do beforehand? Well, there are some requirements before joining my community. For example, you've had to at least publish 30 episodes. And that tells me you're consistent, you're committed. Podcasting is a long-term game. There's so many podcasts that didn't even reach episode 20. So I want to make sure that you're in it for the long-term game. You publish at least 30 episodes. Ideally, you have a global podcast ranking of 10% or higher as measured by Listen Notes. This is a podcast search engine. And that ranking score combines a little bit of the audience listening time on average, and then also the reach. So if you're at least at 10% or higher, that's really, really good. And then the third thing that I really look for too is how do you promote your podcast, right? Because if you're just doing a podcast and not really promoting it, then you're not really going to grow. I want to see that you're doing posts about it on LinkedIn. I want to see that maybe you've got a newsletter and you publish it there, that maybe you've got a YouTube channel and you're trying to generate, acquire new listeners there. So those are like the three big things that I look for in order for you to be a part of my community. Now, my ultimate goal is that all of my podcasters that in the future they can stand alone and get their own sponsorship deals with or without me, right? And that's something I started to work on right now is like, how do you get to that point? And so there's a lot of things that I've learned in the past year. You've got, for example, you've got to have a great sponsorship deck, right? And a lot of our podcasters don't have that. So that's one example. Two, you've got to have a great description about your podcast. When somebody reads it, they need to know exactly who your target audience is, who your listener avatar is. That's something that I personally failed at. But I saw this in another podcast that I was talking to last week, and I thought, oh my God, you know exactly who that listener avatar is. And that's something that I want to make sure all my podcasters are learning about. And so I'm putting together, it's not necessarily a course, but basically it's like a guide, like, hey, like a checklist. Make sure you have this done. Make sure you've got your slides done. Make sure you've got another means to promote your podcast, whether it's through a newsletter, maybe it's through a LinkedIn company page or some other means. But I want to make sure all the podcasts have this, because once you have all these things met, then it's going to be much, much easier for you to get a sponsorship on your own.
Yeah, that's great. I mean, that's the biggest struggle, right? How can not just record the episode, but actually build the audience. Uh, that's kind of the biggest struggles, and I struggle with that. Even though I do the distribution, all those stuff, but it's
Yeah.
kind of like interesting because people here in Serbia, in the Balkans, they basically consume podcasts on YouTube. So only like the video, and then in the US or in all the places where people actually drive longer, they consume it on the audio platforms. And it's kind of interesting. You build in a different way on all those platforms. So you need to find a way how to actually attract people to find your podcast, not to click on a link and go, but to actually make them interested to go to Google to find it, to type in the name of your podcast or you as a host or however it is, and find this episode or this exact podcast that they want to listen to.
Yeah, I mean, there's some foundations that you should try to do in the very beginning. Like one is the title of the podcast, and Apple Podcasts, the search capability is very similar to what Google search was about 15 years ago. So if you've got the keywords that people are looking for in your title, that helps a lot. But that's only in the very beginning when you launch your podcast, right? Second thing is having a lot of those keywords in various title episodes of um, of your podcast too. That helps a lot. But the cornerstone activities that I do on a consistent basis is I make it very easy for my guests to share the podcast with their audience. I provide them like one image, one clip. I give them instructions on how to do that. I even send them a calendar invite beforehand, like maybe 3 or 4 weeks away, just like a calendar spot that just says, hey, our podcast episode is going to go live on this day. You can access, images or clips here in this folder. Here's something that you can say if you want to promote it. But that helps a lot. And there's other different growth tactics that I've tried in the past. A lot of them, for the most case, don't work as good as some of these cornerstone activities, but we're still learning. I mean, I'm bringing in YouTube experts to talk to our community on a monthly basis because I want everybody to really generate and be good at YouTube and growing an audience on YouTube. I mean, a lot of new people who have found my podcast did so through YouTube, and they just never heard about me elsewhere, anywhere else. So I think it's a great platform to get discovered by new audiences.
Definitely, it's a great platform for building a brand, and also like you need just one video, right, to go off, and then you are already getting the traction and getting there. I remember interviewing, I don't know who it was, but he said he got banned on from LinkedIn from different stuff couple of times. And I asked him, so what do you do for a living? He has said the same thing, and only two videos that I got traction from LinkedIn, they are getting me return that I don't need to go to LinkedIn again.
Wow.
And it's kind of interesting. We had a question from Mohammed, but we'll answer it at the end. Before we get into how do you prepare your hosts to create the right ads and to get there, let's dive a little bit into how do you find the right fit for the brands and for the podcast hosts on the other side.
Yeah, I mean, the first thing that I do is I have like a wait list on the website, and it's for brands because there's not an infinite amount of inventory uh, for everybody. There just isn't. I mean, the average podcast host in my community runs one ad on their episode. That's it. And if we're doing 4 week minimum campaign, well, they're booked out for an entire 4 weeks, right? So I just don't have a lot of inventory available. Therefore, I've got a wait list for brands to fill out. They tell me who their target audience is, what regions are they really active in and trying to reach. Because in my network, I can see which podcasts have, a bigger audience in Europe versus North America, who their target audience, who their listeners are. So I kind of match them that way. And then once I have a phone call, the initial kickoff with the brand, I ask them, okay, I kind of know who your target audience is. I went to your LinkedIn page. I looked at previous posts that you guys did. I researched more about you. I think this is your target audience. For example, let's say it's human resources professionals. But tell me, are there other use cases? Are there other customer avatars that you guys want to promote as well? And that actually happened yesterday. It was a company called GiftBit, and they may be a new client of ours. And I thought HR professionals were the only target audience they're trying to reach. But she actually said, no, a lot of B2B marketers utilize us because they want to incentivize people who take their surveys. And I thought, oh my God, well, that opens up a whole new opportunity for us because I've got a lot of B2B marketers in my community. So I want to hear about use cases as well, in addition to what the person tells me their target audience is. And that's how I kind of match them up by going through my platform and just saying, okay, I got 7 podcasts here that are great for HR, and I know this person wants an HR related podcast, and so now I know who to present to them.
Yeah, I mean, it comes down to you actually knowing your community and who you are actually pitching to the brands.
Yeah, and I've listened to every episode of every podcaster in my community, so I've got a really good idea of who their audience is and what their content is about. And so I'm never going to bring a podcaster in my community a potential sponsor where it just doesn't make sense. I mean, I would never talk about Salesforce because I would never use Salesforce, and I think my audience knows that. So it's the same thing for each of my podcasters too.
Yeah, I totally agree, and I can see having looked at the brands that you are bringing in and you are working with. It's kind of your niche and where you're going, getting looking at the size of the company and the right fit when it comes to the podcast.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely.
So tell me now from the standpoint of somebody who is owning a podcast and you got them a deal. How do you get them to do the advertising the right way inside the episodes? That's always something, like I know some hosts, they say, "Oh, I don't want to sound super, promotional." On the other hand, I'm working with a lot of companies, and they say we don't want to promote ourselves directly.
Yeah.
We want to be there, but not, be, in front of everybody's eyes.
Yeah. Well, I always tell our sponsors, like, hey, give all of us that are going to be a part of the campaign a free trial, right? Let us try the product, and then let me craft the ad. You can send me talking points if you want, but here's my process. I go and I try the product on the website. I write down 1 or 2 things that I really liked about it, like 1 or 2 features. And then I go to G2 and I looked at customer reviews about the product. and I'm specifically looking for reviews of people who like the same features that I did. And I want to see what they said about those features, because and most times most times the best copy is actually coming from a real customer, right? And
Mhm.
so I kind of blend a G2 review with my preferences and my copywriting style, and that's how I kind of craft the ad. And then I send it to the client for them to approve. They can give me a little bit of feedback. They can make a little bit of changes. We'll discuss what's the call to action. Some clients will create a specific landing page for us, or maybe a specific promotion. Once I have the ad script approved, I then share it with the podcasters who are part of the campaign, and they record their own version of it. And so they can actually tweak it or modify it a little bit to make it, sound more like their personality, their style. I want them to do that. I want it to sound, as authentic as possible. And then once they craft the ads, they upload that to a Google folder. The client can listen to them and provide feedback if wanted. But that's really the first step in the process of when we get a campaign going. And we haven't yet to actually launch a campaign together, although I'm keeping my fingers crossed that that happens in the next 2 weeks. But you'll see that I've got a process. It's basically a little onboarding training for how to do this, right? I've got like different Loom videos, and I got, visual examples like, okay, when you put your call to action, this is what it should look like. This is where it should be put. This is the link that you're going to use for that, right? When you add your ad into your podcast, there's some things that you don't say. Don't say like, okay, now it's time for our advertiser. No, 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 don't say that. Instead, this is how you transition into the ad. So there's all these little things that I've learned over the past year that I share with the people in my community, so that we make it a really successful campaign for the client.
Love that. It needs to come natural inside the how we're running our podcast, right? So to fit naturally, and then basically it gives additional value to the listener.
Oh yeah, yeah, absolutely. I mean, sometimes I'll create two or three versions of the ad script, and I'll tell the podcasters all of these have been approved, but you pick which one that you like more and you think resonates with you and your audience more, and go with that one. So we're all about authenticity here.
So I have a question that usually companies say when they want to invest in a podcast, or they want to invest in I don't know, influencer campaign or something like that. They always say like, "Oh, we want to create the awareness." Right, and
Yeah,
usually that comes from the marketing team, but then the executives and and the board and everybody else says, fuck awareness, we want to see the revenue.
yeah.
So I'm interested in how you are actually measuring the effectiveness of the podcast, having all that in mind.
We did a recent campaign for Landbot, and we loved working with them because some of the things they did to help us with tracking, they created a specific landing page that only our podcasters knew about and that we mentioned, right? So instead of landbot.io, it was landbot.io/try. And we mentioned that in the podcast, right? So they were able to see landing page views and the number of traffic that was going specifically to that page. And the other thing that they did is that they looked at direct traffic and indirect traffic week by week to see what kind of lifts they were getting. And although that's not like a direct measure, with the podcast, but if I think we were the only big campaign that was running during that time, so they were able to see the fluctuations in traffic. And then the other thing they did, because we recommended it, is we recommend this to all clients no matter what. On your sign up flow, on your onboarding flow, have the question, how did you hear about us? You can keep it optional, but have that question, because a lot of people will say through a podcast or through a podcast ad. And they did that too. And sure enough, I think from a 4-week campaign just across 3 podcasters, they had something like 60 people indicate on that question that they heard about them through a podcast ad. And so those are like the basic things that we always recommend our clients to do. And it makes it much easier for us to see how the campaign performed as well. So there you go.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I'm now looking from a brand standpoint. Basically, you are offering them a package to advertise on a couple of different podcasts, and basically working all together, it creates kind of like an avalanche. And that's exactly what I would look for if I want to do that sort of a campaign, right? Not one person doing it or one podcast. Okay, if it's a big one, that can work. But if those are like a couple of smaller or mid-size podcasts, then I want to have, see if I can create an avalanche of people coming from different places, and that all grows together into the results that we are aiming for.
Yeah, Namanja, the worst thing that a SaaS marketer can do if they're doing podcast advertising is just advertise on one podcast, even if it's a big one. I'll give you an example. I'm not going to say the brand's name, but a pretty big brand, big CRM in the SaaS space. They did a big podcast campaign with a major podcast that's out there that's pretty well known across founders and VCs, and the return was really below expectations. And so what as a result, what happened? It left a bad taste in the senior management's mouth, and they don't want to try podcast advertising again because from their from their memory, it's like, well, we tried that already and it didn't work. But that's the worst way to go about it, is by advertising on one podcast. Our approach is different. We recommend 5 to 10 different podcasts, minimum 5. Advertise on those 5. Let's see which ones work, and whichever ones work, then let's see how we can expand that partnership with those podcasters, because many of them do LinkedIn live events. Many of them have newsletters. Many of them are willing to do an organic post on LinkedIn on behalf of the sponsors, right? How can we expand that relationship and collaborationship even more? And you're not going to get that if you're just doing one podcast at a time.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I look at myself, I'm building a consultancy on one hand, but on the other hand, I'm building my media presence, right? Because, it's always been there, but you're thinking, oh, we should go to other levels. And, as we are all becoming older, more experienced with bigger audiences, then it's kind of normal to get and to develop different kind of media sets that allows you more flexibility in working with brands and with companies, in a different way.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, we don't even consider ourselves like an agency. I mean, I'm all about being a growth partner for whatever brand that we work with. I want this to be a win-win relationship, a long-term relationship, and the most of the brands that we worked with, they've renewed. They want to continue working with us because it's going above and beyond. It's not just the advertising spots on the podcast. It's also, hey, here are other ideas on how we can leverage this. Here are other ideas on, we can actually get more reach. Oh, I noticed that you're interested in this. I know somebody who's really great at that. I'd be happy to make an introduction, because Namanja, you've got a wealth of experience, but not just experience. You got a wealth of connections of people who are really
Hmm.
good at doing certain things, and that's where the introductions and the referrals come in. And if they're interested in creating their own podcast, for example, I recommend them to my buddy Tom Hunt and his agency Fame. If they're interested in actually guest podcasting, because that's another way to grow your brand by being on guests and multiple guests. There's another company I work with that does it really, really well, and they've been doing it for over 10 years, and I trust them. And so I'm willing to make those introductions as well, because I consider every client we work with to be a partner, and not just a one-off deal. But let's see how we can work together for the long term.
Yeah, I love that. I love that. I mean, that's basically what I've been doing, since 2019 when I started it, just in a different way. You develop your relationship with companies, develops your relationship with other people, develops. But at the end, it comes down to, are you willing to go the extra mile, and where you see the opportunity to, bring additional value, help. That's what you do. And it brings us to one other topic that I wanted us to talk about. It's the community, right? Because basically what you are actually doing, you're building a community of people that can help the brands in a different way. At least that's how I see it.
Yeah. I mean, this has been a lot of fun, and I'm learning how to be a community nurturer and a community builder. I didn't know I was going to be doing this at the same time, but really, that's what makes us different. Is that I don't have like a database of hundreds of different podcasts, right? I'm bringing on one podcaster at a time, and when they come on, it's also asking them, what value can you add to the community, right? What are your goals, right? Because in addition to our Slack channel, every month we meet up, we try to learn something new. I'm also going to start allowing some of the podcasters to present something that they're working on. Maybe it's a project, or maybe it's something that they think the community will find valuable. But a lot of the podcasters have gotten to know one another. They've gotten to work with each other in some capacity, and so that's develop friendships, and that's what I really I'm going for, and to keep us strong, because that definitely differentiates me from any other network out there. Is that, hey, for many of us, we've gotten to know each other. We all know each other. We work with each other, and we're here to support one another. And whether it's growing your podcast, growing your business, or whatever capacity, or make introductions, that's what the community is all about. So I've gotten a little bit better at doing this over the past year or so. I'm still learning a lot. There's going to be a great podcast episode with Claudia Cafeo. She's built the No Codes community to over 1,000 members, and she's fantastic at doing this. She was recently a guest on my podcast, so I learned a lot. So there's going to be a lot of new things that are happening within my community, and to make it better. But honestly, it's getting people like you, good quality people like you, to join that makes it much easier.
Yeah, so tell the people what's the name of the community. That's also a good story.
Yeah. Well, I mean, the community is well, it's called the Innovators Can Laugh podcaster community. The name of the business is B2B PodPros, but it's called Innovators Can Laugh because that's the name of my podcast, Innovators Can Laugh. Yeah.
Yeah, that made me think, because always when we think about innovation, about these kind of things, and I've been thinking these days because there are a couple of people building another association of IT companies here in Serbia, and I'm like, it's always like we are serious. We want to talk about taxes. We want to talk about different stuff, and I'm like, where's fun in all that? Like,
Yeah.
I'm missing that part.
Yeah. Yeah. No, that goes back to, like, who's my avatar, my listener avatar for my own podcast, because over the time, so many people would tell me, like, oh, people listen to podcasts because they want to learn. It's very true. But there are some podcasts that I listen to where I'm not really interested in learning something new. It's because I feel like I'm hanging out with the podcast hosts and I like their personality. And so that's what I aim for my podcast to be, is for just to have really, really good camaraderie and conversation with the guests that I bring on, and hoping that the listeners can relate in some way, because they are B2B marketers or they are startup founders in their own world.
Yeah, exactly. Now listening to you, what comes to my mind is Scott Galloway and his network of podcasts. Basically, when I found myself, I'll listen to that to relax and chill while I travel. So the way, they talk about the news, they talk about the things, the way he compares stuff,
Yeah.
it's out of this world. And I'm like, okay, I want to hear this man talk about anything serious because he brings in comparison that I would never think of.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And so that's, something that, I mean, it's obvious that he got so bigger followers list as a podcast, but also as a personal brand and all those other stuff. Because, he brings in his personality with experience and all those other stuff. And I think that's what separates actually each podcast and each brand. It's, you cannot go over who you are, right?
Yeah.
If you are knowledgeable, if you are fun, if you are both, or it's something else, you need to bring in what separates you from the others.
Yeah. I heard a quote one time, and it said, People will tune into a new podcast for the guests, but they'll come back for the hosts." And so it's really about being true to yourself, and you can't fake being somebody else on a podcast if you're a host. So you really got to go back to being yourself. And if that comes out, then you'll find the audience that's right for you, instead of trying to attract an audience that's not really who you really don't connect with, and can't connect with genuinely.
Exactly. I mean, listen, I want to tell to the people, nobody sends email like you do to the members of the community. So it's not like something that's like business wise, professional. Okay, it is, but it's not boring. It's just an email that I would send to my team. Right? It's a
Yeah.
team working together, and that's what I like. So this is what we're gonna do. If you have any, additional things that you want to discuss or you want to do, let me know. This is the suggestion. These are the action items that we will do. Let me know. How many of you want to actually get into that, and I love that sort of communication. I wasn't the most active guy over there on the list, but I'm gonna be, and I'm the one reading, just so you know. So,
Yeah.
and I appreciate that way of communication because I'm that kind of a guy, like direct, honest, but at the same time, I am being what I am.
Yeah, yeah. No, I try to keep it simple and short, and I try to bring a smile. I'm like, okay, that's why, I have like the cartoons or whatever sometimes, but I want people when they open the email, at the very least, they're going to get a kick out of it or a smile.
Love that, love that. So, there's a question that I think we'll have to answer because Mohammed says, I started a B2B marketing agency this year. Our podcast a good way to generate leads for the agency? So I know my answer, but I want to hear yours first.
You know what? If you're thinking about creating a podcast, Mohammed, I know another agency that recently did so. They told me that after a couple of seasons, they didn't really generate leads, but they were able to generate a lot of recruitment, a lot of talent, a lot of people who were interested in working at the agency. And so, from that standpoint, it was really beneficial for them. If you're thinking about advertising on a podcast for your marketing agency, I don't know. We've never really advertised another agency before. It's probably something that most of our podcasters wouldn't do. But if you're interested in doing that, then you could probably try doing a small buy on some of the larger networks and try to doing on the podcasts that have an audience that you're trying to reach. Most of them are going to be very just business general related. But some of the networks out there allow you to specify what location you're trying to reach. So try to get as targeted as you can get when working with some of the larger ad networks.
Yeah, what I can say from a different standpoint is being the one who was building the agency. Podcast might be a nice thing to enter the larger market or to get the authority confirmed reputation and to build out those stuff, right? To build a relationship with your target audience, with the people who are subject matter expert, getting your target group under their posts and as their audience. That might be the good thing, because when I started funky marketing, I needed something to make us look bigger, right? So I made a list of like 20 funky marketing top voices, and I recorded an episode with each of them to kind of get their story, to bring on the reputation, but also to kind of see if I can talk on the same level with them about the things that we do. And it helped a lot me, but also helped the visibility because people started to say, funky marketing, they are the big boys in the community. Right. And on the other hand, I had another podcast, which is kind of interesting. You said like 30 episodes is kind of the borderline. And we recorded, I think, 34 or 38. Me and Marty Sanchez, a friend of mine from Spain, who is now working in, I think, boxing in the US, in Miami. But basically, we got people on Zoom with the audience to kind of share weekly how are we building our agencies, and how are we hiring, how are we actually firing people, how are we changing the strategies, the narratives. And I use that episode, those sets of episodes, not the episode, to kind of give each person that I employed inside the onboarding list to listen to this and realize how my mindset was changing. It was in a scope of the year that we recorded it. So that might be also useful tool for you to kind of have a person to talk with, and then you have questions, so you can help others, and it builds a momentum and it builds a small community around it. So yeah, hopefully we answered that. But tell me now one thing. I want to know when it comes to the companies and how they see value in what you do and how you build the momentum with that. So I'm thinking, is their offer actually changing in time, or do you tend to like keep, okay, this ad is actually really working, we're gonna keep that, maybe some others who are not, we're gonna change, and then if we have like new messaging or new offers, and then we're going to see how we introduce those things. I think we skip that part, and it's a really interesting one.
Yeah, some of it's by regional. So, for example, with Dealfront, we promoted Lead Feeder, which is their brand in the U.S. But because of GDPR here in Europe, for the European podcasters, we actually promoted Dealfront and talked about the GDPR and how it meets those standards. So we had two different ads based on region. For other advertisers, it's been on product audience fit and talk about different use cases. And so, like for example, this new example, we'll have an ad that's really focused on HR podcasts, but then we'll have another ad that's really focused on B2B marketers and how they can get more people doing their surveys and how to incentivize those people. So it's usually either by region or just by use cases. That's what we've been going about.
Yeah, man, and I love that. There's a thought behind it, actually, right? I don't did hear that much these days. So I like when I hear that somebody actually saw the big picture, and so like we're not gonna go all in, the same messaging on everything, but we're gonna take care of the demographics of the audience and of everything else.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, it's one of the things that, in order to make this as effective as possible, it's what's going to relate most with the audience that's going to be listening to this podcast. And so, therefore, that's what happens with the kickoff meeting. It's like, hey, are there different use cases? What regions are you really trying to target here? And then that's where we go in and kind of handpick. All right, these are great for this region, and I think for this use case, and these other podcasters are really better for this other use case here. So we have two different campaigns going, same client, but actually two different campaigns essentially.
Yeah, I love that. One of the things that I can recommend to the people is exactly what we are doing now, right? Pairing with a guest. And I've been talking to a company recently about it because, okay, let's say I'm the subject matter expert or influencer, and they hired me, and I have the specific audience. They like my expertise and how do I talk about specific things, but they want to maybe reach other markets as well, and they want to go to have me as a person or a podcast as a mean through which the messaging goes, right? So having a guest from I don't know, let's say from DACH region, if they want to target that region, or from the US or maybe Turkey or other region, and they can stream on their profiles as well, and that's additional thing that usually we don't consider that much, which is uh, what you can do with recording of the podcast. Not only publish podcast as an episode, but use it as a mean to communicate with the community.
Yeah, yeah, totally agree. Totally agree, Nemanja. I mean, I think what you've done with your show, I think it's fantastic. I like how you've been expanding on YouTube. I like a lot of the guests that you bring on. Some of them are even members of my community. I
Yeah,
think Mark.
that was kind of interesting. The thing that I saw. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, like Mark Evans, and then obviously Mahavohe, and I worked with her before. She's fantastic to work with, and I think a few other people as well. So, I think I think over time, probably in the next 12 to 18 months, I think a good chunk of B2B podcasters are going to be in the community, and we're all going to know who we are, what we do, and then how we can support one another as well. And I think that's going to be a great thing. Yeah, it's me.
Yeah, and it's good. I mean, I'm looking at a couple of lists these days, of the top B2B marketing podcasts and those kind of things. And I've been going through the comments. It's kind of a nice topic to just chat before the end. And somebody asked those people who created the list, how did you actually come up with the list?
Yeah,
And they say, okay, we listened to some of the podcasts already, but then they type in B2B, right? And they went through it, and that's how they found the podcast. And I'm
yeah,
like, okay, so like for some things, name of the podcast matter,
yeah,
right? But on the other hand, does it really affect the search and those kind of things? That's kind of an interesting and another topic to hear, because I'm going through the Spotify and how people are, finding the podcast and impressions and those kind of things. There's been tons of impressions,
yeah.
right? But not many people are actually coming through the Spotify to listen to the podcast.
Yeah.
So that's something also to think about, how all these separate platforms work together. But then on the other hand, you know, what is a relevant list of the podcast?
Yeah, yeah, and a lot of those lists, half the podcasts on those lists are not even active anymore. That's what
Yeah,
I've
yeah.
discovered.
I mean, the same as lists of top voices or something like that. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah, it's like, wow, this hasn't ran an episode in over 12 months, but it's on their list, and it's like you could probably remove this. But yeah, I was looking for one list. I think it was like top startup podcast or something like that. And I'm like, God, half the podcasts on here, they're not even running episodes anymore. But this is like coming, number one or two in Google search results, and a lot of people are clicking on this and not having a good experience because they're listening to episodes. Okay, maybe the episodes were fantastic, but it's not anything fresh, not anything current.
Exactly, exactly. And I mean, there are different ways, different strategies that people can use to promote the podcast. And I'm seeing every day different things. And I'm glad that I'm in a community, because we will probably see, other hosts developing and doing different stuff. For example, what I saw, like Combinator. So they had their podcast and they had the first season. They are running the second season now, and only now, a lot later, they are coming up with posting those videos on YouTube. And this is where I discovered the podcast,
Yeah.
right? So, and I said, okay, so that's the second time that guest is on the show. Let me find the first episode, which is
Yeah.
in the first season. So different things, and it's actually an evolving thing, the whole podcast space. And I think we'll gonna get more and more inside the advertising part of it, as it is constantly growing.
Yeah, yeah, I'm excited about our next meetup because Sean Temper from Payback Time, he's grown his YouTube subscribers like in 2 weeks from 2,000 to 3,000 followers. And he's like, hey, I think we cracked the code on this. And so he's actually going to be presenting in our next meetup in August. But actually, there's going to be two different meetups, one for those in North America and one of those in Europe. But if it's, I'll definitely record it and share it with the European podcasters and point out which timestamps I think will be useful for them, because I want everybody in the community to learn from what he's learned.
Yeah, definitely. Sean is also my guest here. Actually, he was the only one talking about finance, which is kind of interesting. So we talk a little bit about his guitar, about rock and roll, about the finances, and he's generally a great guy.
Yeah.
Eric, tell the people where they can find more information about you, about your podcast, about the community, and everything that you do.
Yeah. Well, hey, I'm on LinkedIn usually daily. So you can go to Eric Melchor, find me on there, send a connection request. You want to learn more about the community, go to B2B PodPros.com. If you want to check out the podcast, I only interview European startup founders or marketers, and just search for Innovators Can Laugh. You can find it on YouTube, Apple, or Spotify.
Perfect. Guys, now is the time when I'm telling you to go back to the beginning of the episode, listen to everything. We share a lot of stuff. So stop wherever you think that you need something to be more clear. Reach out to Eric, reach out to me. We're always here to help. I'll add the links to everything that Eric said in the show notes. And as I always say, like, keep it funky. Eric, thank you, guys. See you in another episode.